This is PonderMed, breaking down the big ideas in healthcare. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. You'll be pleased to hear I've got a slightly less COVID-heavy episode to play for you today. I'm chatting to Lt.Col Dave Grossman, who I know a lot of people listening to this will be well aware of. He is a former US Army Ranger, paratrooper, a US Martial Arts Hall of Famer, and also a psychology professor. He is the author of one of my favorite books and an incredibly important book for my career, which is On Combat: The Psychology and Physiology of Deadly Conflict in War and in Peace, which is a book all about the brutality of conflict, and sort of it's almost like a teaching manual for developing coping strategies in dealing with the physiological and psychological effects of violence, which of course has some relevance to us in frontline healthcare, and it's been discussed by people much more important than me in the emergency medicine world, and it's been a huge hit. I became aware of Lt.Col Grossman's work a few years ago after I finished work in South Africa, and I bring up my experience in South Africa at the beginning of our conversation. I know that a lot of people listening to this will have heard me bang on about my experience over there over and over again. I've been giving a talk called My Mental Toughness Manifesto, which centers on my experience in South Africa for ages. So I'm sure that there'll be at least a handful of people that have seen or heard that talk listening to this that will be a bit bored of it. And yeah, I've been waxing about this experience for the best part of 5 years. And the reason why is because it was the single most important thing I've ever done. It transformed me as a doctor, gave me confidence. I think it was my sort of coming of age moment in my medicine career. And it had a huge effect on me personally as well. It was just an absolutely incredible experience. And that's in large part because initially I was just completely shocked at the work that the doctors and nurses were doing over there. They were seeing just enormous volumes of devastating major trauma in this township that I was working in. So I apologize for people that are a bit over me discussing South Africa and talking about South Africa, but it really is that important to me. So yeah, I had my experience over there, and then a few months later I read On Combat, and it gave me a great understanding of some of the things that happened to my mind and to my body. I never thought I'd get a chance to interview the Colonel. He seemed way out of my reach, but I was browsing online the other day, and I stumbled across his website, Philology.com, and I thought to myself, do you know what, I'm just going to send him an email, see what happens. And next thing I know, I'm booking him for a podcast interview. And a few days later, of course, we recorded. And the reason why is because normally the Colonel is traveling around the US and around the world, speaking to the warrior community, so people in military, law enforcement, the fire service, anybody who's in a risky profession where their lives are on the line. And because of COVID-19, because of the pandemic, he has had less time out on the road and more time to do interviews via his computer. So I feel hugely lucky. It was a huge honor to speak essentially to one of my heroes, and it was a firecracker of a conversation. Without further ado, Lt.Col Dave Grossman. I'll talk to you just a little bit up front about how I know about your work, because I know that the majority of your audience are people from what you call the warrior community. As a healthcare man, you know, I became aware of your work a few years ago. You became suddenly quite high profile in the emergency medicine world because you were discussed on a couple of podcasts, and your book On Combat became a big hit amongst us.
Oh, so cool.
I don't know whether you were aware of that. No, yeah, it's awesome. So I was working in South Africa back in 2015. I volunteered out there for roughly 4 months, and I had a profoundly stressful experience. It was a critically important experience for my career, and I've since reflected hugely on what happened and what happened to my physiology, what happened to my psychology, how my performance was impacted. And then I read your book on the recommendation of some of the people in my community after the experience. And it really made me understand what happened. So I was working in a township in South Africa called Khayelitsha, which is a place that's full of violence, full of very significant volumes of major trauma. And I'd never experienced anything like that in my career, not even close. And as I say, it really had a profound impact on my body. And yeah, reading your book clarified to me what happened. And I've since incorporated a lot of your philosophy into presentations that I've made on the subject of stress management in acutely stressful situations, which we do obviously encounter in frontline healthcare. So this really is a huge moment for me speaking to you, because you've played a significant role in my career to date.
Such an honor to be of service.
Could we just kick off by you talking a bit about yourself and your career and what you're up to now? Because there will probably be quite a few people listening to this that won't be that familiar with what you do.
Yeah. Well, up quick and dirty, I retired for the Army 23 years ago. And I've been on the road 200-300 days a year for the last 23 years. I trained military, law enforcement, every federal agency in the U.S., dozens of foreign nations. Had the honor to be over in England a bit doing some work. My first book came out before I retired, On Killing, and it talks about the resistance to killing inside most healthy members of our species, how the military overcomes that resistance. And oh, by the way, the video games are doing the same thing to our kids without the safeguard of discipline. And as a young soldier in 1974, a paratrooper in an elite unit, we had Vietnam veterans all around us, and we wanted to find out what combat was going to be like. And they wouldn't say. It's kind of like if somebody walked up to you and asked about your sex life, you're going to blow them off. It's intimate and personal. But if somebody from a scholarly perspective, Masters and Johnson does a sex survey, you probably talk to them. And so my first book, On Killing, was based on getting into that dynamic of that taboo topic of killing. And I thought what is at the heart of combat was the act of killing. What I found out was you got to dig a layer deeper. What was really important became my second book, On Combat. And it talks about auditory exclusion. How in the world could we have had 500 years of gunpowder combat and not let people know the shots would probably get muted in combat? Tunnel vision, slow motion time. I've had hundreds of people tell me they see the bullet in combat, and I believe them. But most importantly is the aftermath dynamics.
As you will, of course, be aware, we're speaking at a very odd time in that a pandemic is sweeping across the world. And that has obviously had a big impact on what I do at work. And it's stressful. It's stressful in terms of the kind of baseline level of stress that we're all feeling. And there's a kind of existential element to that. But equally, there are times, and this was happening a bit more at the start of this, the caseload has definitely slowed down significantly, but quite often we're seeing patients that are very sick and need immediate intervention. And you need to be able to locate yourself, locate your skill set, locate your thinking now. So what I'd like to ask you a bit more about is what you describe on Combat as the zones of stress physiology. Yeah. So condition white, condition yellow, then condition black. Because that bit fascinated me. I loved the way you categorized the different performance conditions that you can be in. So yeah, if you could talk a bit about that, that would be awesome.
Let's get an insight in that. When we talk about heart rate, we try to measure using heart rate, but it's really important that we understand that it is fear or hormonal driven heart rate increase. You can do a set of wind sprints. That's exercise to induce heart rate increase. And do a set of wind sprints, have your heart pounding, and try to perform fine motor skills. And that is not a bad training dynamic, but it is not the same as when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and your heart is pounding. So we tie it in with heart rate to a certain degree, but it's a specific type of heart rate, increased heart rate. Condition white is a state of denial. And if suddenly, you're in total denial, you don't believe these things could ever happen, and a handful of shot up people come into your emergency room, they're shot to hell, cut to hell, bad things have happened, and suddenly, boom, you're faced with this thing. If you've been around the block a couple of times, you've seen this happen before, you're not stunned by it. But if you have no expectation that it will happen, if you think bad things will never happen, and suddenly they hit you, you're in condition white. And very often that causes you to over-respond and move right what we call condition black. Our goal is to live our life in condition yellow, a state of mental readiness. And again, from a medical perspective, my EMS, my ambulance crew, they pull up to this terrible crime scene, these people shot up. They know this could happen. It's part of the job. It's what they do. They're professional. They remain calm. Now, as we move up, as our heart rate moves up, we begin to leave condition yellow into a realm that we call condition red. On the battlefield, who has to live in condition yellow? Never lose fine motor control. Well, the bomb tech, the medic, the sniper, the leader. But the point man on the entry team goes in the door, and we use basketball as a great analogy. The player out on the court is in condition red. He's rocking and rolling. He makes a snapshot because he'd done 100,000 shots just like it in practice. But give him 5 seconds, make a free throw, and watch what they're doing. Watch them. They take that breath, they regain that control, and they make that free throw. They pull themselves down to condition yellow. So on American football, the linemen, the linebackers, never need fine motor control. They go out of the locker room, slam their head against the locker. They want to live the whole game in condition red. They don't need fine motor control. They need that adrenaline dump in those respective times. But the quarterback, he sits back and remains in condition yellow. He's making that precision shot. The quarterback, the kicker, the coach, they want to live in condition yellow. I've taught psych in 3 different universities. In every university, they'll tell you the football players are all dumb as a box of rocks. They're no dumber than anybody else, but their sport does work against them. You take a football player, put him under stress. Where's his happy spot? Boom. He goes straight condition red. And we call that test anxiety. And so teaching people to breathe and to pull themselves from condition red down to condition yellow is one of the fundamental human skills that we need to know. When I taught intro psych within a semester, I had the largest auditorium on campus with 2 sections full, and all of the coaches use their coach override to get their players into my class because I taught them early on about the breathing. And then every time I administer a test, partway into the test, stop, put your pencil down, and breathe. In through the nose, 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. Out through the lips, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Again and again. Now back to your test. By the end of the semester, I didn't have to do that. They were doing it themselves. Nobody had ever taught them this fundamental human skill of moving from condition yellow to condition red and back again at need. And of course, when we become over-aroused, then we can enter a realm of panic, condition black. And you're no longer capable of performing very well at all. Gross motor skills is all you have. You've lost all cognitive forebrain dynamics, and that kind of defines the physiological levels. And so the ER doc, the EMS, they need to live in condition yellow. The heart starts pounding, they start to lose that zone. They got to stop, breathe, and as you said, be in that realm where you're your professional best. Be self-aware, have the tools, and of course, a great tool is a big swig of water. Dry mouth is one of the symptoms of sympathetic nervous system arousal, and it also is one of the indicators you need to take a swig of water. Gain control, pull yourself back down into the zone.
So I just wanted to zoom in quickly on the breathing strategy that Colonel Grossman is discussing there, because it's something that I've used reasonably regularly over the last few years and have talked about regularly as well. So when you are highly stressed, when you're in that acutely stressful moment and you are over aroused and you're in condition black, it's so useful just to consciously, deliberately control your breathing, slow the breathing down. It suddenly opens up all of your perceptions. So your auditory perception, your visual perception, things seem to slow down. You have this kind of prevailing sense of clarity and calm. It's almost like sort of pressing Control-Alt-Delete on that highly stressful moment, and you can sort of start from scratch. Super useful, and one that I would really encourage anybody to use if they find themselves in that paralyzing, stressful moment. And of course, wearing a mask, which we're all having to do at the moment at work, a mask that is strapped to our face really tightly, makes breathing a very different experience. And that's what we discussed next.
And let's talk about the mask for a minute. Here in America, everybody's wearing a mask. My wife and I just went to the store and we're wearing masks. In the Army, I wore a gas mask for days, and we had to get inoculated. I was sitting up on a hill one time, a young captain, company commander, battalion chaplain's beside me, and I'm on the radio, and the battalion operations officer, a major, said, "You don't have your mask on." We'd hear it over the mic. I said, "I got battalion chaplain right here. I'll confirm you have my mask on." That what you're hearing over the mic is not the mask; it's your stress. Remain calm. Put the transmitter right up to the voice meter. Talk normally, and you'll sound normal. And so here's people who have been spending their whole career wearing a mask, who still can't overcome that stress response. And now we're taking a whole world and telling them to wear a mask. My wife was wearing a mask just yesterday in the store, and she says, I got terrible dry mouth. I said, that's a stress response. You need to use your breathing, and we'll get you a swig of water as soon as we can. We don't understand. Of course, masks, we're not getting facial feedback dynamic. Our face is being constrained. Our breathing is being constrained. This is an enormously stressful event. So for the medical community, knowing that these times will come when you have to wear this personal protective equipment, it is important in training to inoculate yourself. In the military, we wore those gas masks for days on end, and we were inoculated. And even those who did it, over their whole career, had still not achieved that level of calm that we really are seeking. And so with the medical community, to inoculate ourselves, to encounter the stressor in training ahead of time is terribly important. And to wear that personal protective equipment for an entire day in training would have been, and I doubt very many of you would have done it in training.
No, so I was stress inoculation as a concept really was the thing that I was most looking forward to asking you about. Right. I think it is just the most beautiful wording. It really illustrates what I believe is such a critically important part of training. And I mean, as I say, I'm just a trainee, but I'm trying to get myself as involved as I can in education. I love the process of training and being involved as a trainer. I find simulation is a double-edged sword. It's something that in medicine can be done very well, but is often used as a tool for teaching specific skills, and perhaps isn't used where I think it would be most effective, which is to stress people out and get them used to having a heart rate, getting into condition red and trying to get themselves down to condition yellow. Yeah. I very much think that the simulation lab is the perfect environment to stress inoculate. It's not a great place to teach someone how to treat, a certain condition. Could you talk a bit more about stress inoculation, and perhaps in the context of your experience in the military and with the police force, right, and the kind of techniques that they use to inoculate trainees?
One of the greatest revolutions in the military and law enforcement community since the invention of gunpowder is what's called reality-based training, and it's used worldwide. Now, the officer goes in with a gun. They're wearing a mask. They're wearing protective equipment. But they got essentially a real gun in their hand. When they pull the trigger, there's a flash and a bang. What leaves the barrel is not a chunk of lead, but a plastic marking capsule. It leaves the barrel at 250, 300, 400 feet per second. when it hits you, it hurts. And we tell people firefighters had to face real burning alley fire in training. We all intuitively understand we can't train a firefighter for a lifetime with flickering red lights, a fan, and some red tissue paper. The fire guy's got to face real burning alley fire. And if you're going to go into life and death event with a gun in your hand, you have to face real burning alley bullets. NYPD is an N of 35,000. NYPD puts this force on force reality-based training. It's not kill or be killed, but it's hurt or be hurt. And they put it in place the following year. They fire half as many shots and get 3 times many hits. So half as many shots is a very good thing. A lot less spraying and praying, a more focused a dynamic of when I should and should not shoot. But when you do shoot, you want to be able to hit. If you miss the target, it's a danger to others. It's a deadly force threat. You fail to stop. Today, the state of New York says you are negligent to give anybody a gun and not give them these force-on-force engagements. NYPD Academy always was 40 hours of firearms training. I'm a cop. My academy is 40 hours of firearms training. And now it's 80 hours. And the second 40-hour block is not range time. It's force-on-force engagements. And then later on, they integrate that into scenario-based training in which you take all of your skills and pull them together in a stressful event. So this dynamic of encountering the stressor ahead of time, cop faces burning alley fire, military and law enforcement face real burning alley bullets. Our simulators, we can simulate combat, but we've got to have a feedback loop when you've been hit for it to be reality-based training. There has to be a dose of reality in there. And so very few of our simulators really give. They started to set up with a shock, and you get a shock in the back or something like that, and they're reasonably effective. But this paint bullet force-on-force engagements has brought us to levels of performance never seen before, never dreamed of.
Do you have any suggestions for how we can stress inoculate better in medical simulation? I mean, making it in real time, having people watch to make it more stressful, having to perform in front of an audience. It's quite difficult using lots of beeping noises, making it as the reality or the simulation as real as possible. But it is quite challenging.
Yeah. Never forget smells. When we do the simulation, there should be a little bowl of shit right there, because you rip open a human body, and most often, they've messed themselves, or there should be a bowl of shit there, and that smell. Better than anybody. You rip open a human body. What kind of smells are there? Blood, shit, piss, vomit, all mixed together. And one of the most primal senses is our sense of smell. And so having that into the simulator is it's one of the things people kind of miss. And when they do it, people don't like it. I don't want to have a bowl of shit sitting there. I don't want to smell shit while I'm doing these things. But in the real world, that's what you're going to do. He's messed himself. His bowels have been, and you got to work on him with that smell. And so these simulators, these stressors, we make them as realistic as we can, and we really miss critical components. And so what you say is all good. People watching realistic simulations, and in the military during peacetime, we had an extensive program, and now we're kind of throttling back in the war, and we're doing it again, of sending all of our medics to emergency rooms on major cities and major hospitals. And there they are watching a real person who's been shot up come into a real emergency room and being treated. And they're observing. And when we do these kind of things, we tell them, turn your forensics brain on. Have a notepad out and be taking notes and collect information. One form of stress inoculation for cops is to go to an autopsy. Every young cop, very early on, needs to go to an autopsy. And again, they're exposed to the smells and the sights and inside of a dead creature. And we tell them it's like an episode of CSI, right? You're turning on your CSI brain. You got a checklist of questions to answer, and you're looking at this autopsy, and you're collecting this data. And we found that to be enormously valuable for our young cop, our young EMS. Before you see that first dead body, before you see that first horrible mutilated individual from that accident or that gunshot wound, that knife wound, you encounter it in the emergency room ahead of time, and you do realistic simulations. When the real thing comes by, you've already been there, and you're able to stay in condition yellow, able to stay in that zone. And you're conscious, and when you're losing that zone, you stop, you breathe, regain control. And again, I'm such a huge fan of you don't always have water there. The breathing is always there, but stop and take a big swig of water.
Yeah.
And regain control.
It's completely fascinating. And I found another quite useful stress inoculation tool, which I don't know whether you would agree with the use of, is just springing it on people. So for example, recently I've been given a bit more of a license to do this because there's a bit more downtime because it's not as busy. There's not many non-COVID-19 patients turning up to the department. But what I've been doing, and my bosses have allowed me to do this, is just spring on a simulation. Just say, boom, there's a guy in a cardiac arrest in there. Go and sort it. And that's probably been the most effective tool the best effective tool in my toolbox, if you like. And I'm sure there's people much more effective than me out there doing a better job, but that's the best one I've found so far.
In law enforcement and military, it's really hard to do these things by surprise, because you got to take your gun off and put on another gun, but in the medical community, I never thought of that. It's brilliant to suddenly whip this on you with no warning whatsoever.
It's not my idea.
Yeah, I know. But I'm thinking about my fire guys and how we can do that with fire. You're in the firehouse, you're sitting around watching TV, and suddenly, out the front door, there's a fire you got to go put out with the fire extinguisher. It comes out of nowhere. The element of surprise, it's just something I hadn't really considered. And obviously, you said other people have, and it's integrated in. I love that. That's good stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll stop it there. In the interests of keeping my podcast at digestible length, I've divided my conversation with Lt.Col Dave Grossman into two. So that was part one. I will play you part two in due course. And in the next one, we discuss the art of the debrief and the importance of sleep. So a very interesting episode lies in wait. Until next time.